This is Humanity Meets Business, Business Therapy with Christine Salvo. I am so excited to introduce my amazing guest today. His name is Ari Gunzburg. Ari Gunzburg is a rising news star in personal growth after experiencing trauma as a child and then extreme volatility as a teenager. As an award-winning international speaker, Ari motivates people using personal stories filled with triumph, tragedy, and transformation. Ari also helps inspire people using one-on-one coaching and his books for both children and adults. New in 2020 is his debut nonfiction title, The Little Book of Greatness. Ari, it is so amazing to have you here, calling all the way from Baltimore, Maryland, right? So yeah. I love that we can kind of go coast to coast here.
The wonders of technology, right? Thanks so much for having me on the show, by the way. Thank you.
Yes,
Christine.
I'm so happy to have you here. So, it's like in reading your bio, I have so many little teasers here, right? And because of the nature of the show, I kind of want to just like dive into like, what the heck happened to you? Where are you coming from here? Like the trauma as a child and then extreme volatility as a teenager. More and more and more and more and more, I think we need to be talking about this stuff. But second of all, it's not going away. The teenagers aren't getting any easier, and childhoods aren't necessarily always getting better. So
there's so much to unpack in everything you said. But just to jump quickly into the childhood moment. So when I was like a kid, when I was like 10 years old, I was out on a field trip, and I can go into like a very detailed story, but I know we don't have like enough time to like really just paint the full picture. But imagine a group of 17 kids walking through the woods with their teacher, and the teacher just falls over. And so the kids are like, what in the world just happened? It happens to be we're a little bit spread out over the trail, but like we gathered together fairly quickly once this moment happened, and we're sitting there. It's like a surreal moment. It's like springtime, so there's like some buds on the trees, some not. There's leaves on the ground. The teacher, the rabbi, is like laying prone on the ground, and the kids are just sitting and standing around being like, OMG, what now? So we went for help. And we went a couple of different ways for help, in which we're running to figure out a way. How do we get out of the woods? What's going on? What do we do? And if not for the fact that there was music at the edge of the woods, I don't know if we would have found our way out of the woods as quickly as we did. But there was music at the edge of the woods, music that sounded almost like a carnival. We get to the edge of the woods and we're like, great, carnival, people, this is amazing. And it was just a random guy standing there playing the bagpipes in a kilt. And we're like, okay, we're not asking him for help. We're going that away. but we found these buildings like a little bit past him. And, so I always tell people, like, I'm pretty sure God told the guy, not like prophecy, but like just gave the guy an urge. I need to go practice today in my kilt in this spot, because that's kind of what led all of us out of the woods, I think, quickly and safely. But we ran to this building. We got a couple of guys. We took them back to what was going on. They started doing CPR. They gathered the rest of the kids. They got them out of there, so nobody was with the rabbi anymore. And it was just like nobody knew what was going on. And like we're all standing there. We're like, what do we do? What's happening? The school, the principal, and the other teachers were all standing around, like near us, but not talking to us. And finally, they just took us home and dropped us off at our houses. And later that day, I don't know how all the other kids found out in the end, but later that day, I told my dad, like, we have no idea what happened. So we called up the school to say, hey, my kid, you dropped him off. What's going on? And as he's on the phone call, you could just watch his face drop like 1,000 feet. And he like looks up at me as he's hanging up the phone. He's like, he's gone. And so like there in the kitchen at that moment, we had this like hugging and sobbing moment where like we were just falling apart, because he knew the teacher as well. And it was just completely and totally crushing. There is a little bit of a happy ending to the story many years later. We were talking earlier about my kids. I have 4 kids, but my second kid was a boy. And we were sitting there at the naming ceremony, and like it was just super emotional. My dad was holding the baby while we were doing the naming and stuff, and he's sitting there holding this little baby, and I whisper the name over to the rabbi who's reading the name out loud, and he sits there and he says the name out loud, and it's that name of this rabbi from 20 plus years beforehand. And it was a super emotional moment. And like I walk over to the side to where my mom was to sit there and see her for a second, and she's crying, and she like looks at me, she's like, yeah, I thought you would name after him. it was funny because like I told my wife, I'm like, yeah, we're naming our first boy, we're naming after this person. And she's like, well, convention says that we're supposed to name like this, and this one's supposed to get this name, and this one's supposed to get this name. And I'm like, yeah, no, you don't understand. From the time I was 10 years old, the first boy that I had was going to be named this. So like all the rest of that stuff, like, you can kind of take that and shift it off to the side. Our first boy that's coming out is going to be named after this guy.
Yeah, or we're having all girls. It's
Yeah,
either this or
sure, sure. But it was
that.
like,
or one of our girls will have the unfortunate pleasure of being named, but this name will be passed on.
yeah. So my son is named after him now, many
Wow.
years later. Um, and it's a little token of a way to keep the memory alive of like this very very traumatic event that happened to me. Um, and it's nice, nice. I don't know, nice, but it's interesting because the synagogue that I pray in, the rabbi's nephew prays there also. So like I see him on a fairly regular basis and stuff, and so like he knows that he's named after him, and then his former brother-in-law and sister-in-law live next door to my parents, which I didn't know this until many years later. But so they see him and they're like, oh, and they see the kid. So like he's got a lot of people who know who he's named after and dote on him a little bit just because of it. Not a lot, just a little bit.
Just
Um,
enough.
just enough, yeah. But then so then that led me through some interesting situations, essentially, which brings me, you mentioned the volatility during the teenage years. So I'm skipping forward a number of years with a lot of stuff happening in the meantime. And I was talking to somebody earlier today about it. It's not a direct catalyst of, but it was a major event that led me into a place where I ended up in these places.
Mm-hmm.
But the main thing is like my teenage years, I mean, I was not doing the right stuff. Like when people say to me like, hey, where'd you go to high school? And I'm like, yeah, the pizza shop. It's because
That's a very original answer. I haven't heard that one yet.
yeah, I mean, that's where I went to high school, basically. I mean, I wasn't actually in high school at the time, but that's basically where I went to high school. I mean,
Love
so look,
it.
I mean, after that, I got my GD, I went to college. I
Sure,
did
sure.
everything. Not everybody does, but I did. But at the time, like I was hanging out with people they're great people. I love them. We were all doing the wrong things together, and we were all making poor choices together. And I made a bunch of poor choices and a bunch of wrong choices that took me into some pretty crazy situations sometimes. Um, Obviously I haven't done everything, but like, if you mention almost anything, there's a decent chance that I did it or it happened to me. Um, to a degree, like there's certain things that like, there's certain things that like just didn't happen, but the experiences that I had then were like super super varied, and like recreational use and tons of partying and brush ups with the law and everything, and issues with this and issues with that, and just a lot of things that happened in the period of a few short years that certainly had a long lasting effect on a lot of different things that I went through. Um, Overall, now that I'm out of it and now that we're on the other side of it, like for the better, I mean, it's some of those things where you're like, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy necessarily, but if you've gone through them and you have a healthy attitude about them, now that you've gone through them, well, they weren't the worst thing in the world post facto, but during to ever want to ever do anything like that again, absolutely not. Um, sometimes a scary illness might be a type of thing like that. Nobody ever wants to get super sick, but a lot of times when people do get sick and then they get better, they find that their life has improved for it, or that sometimes if it's something like, let's say, the measles, uh, or something like that, like once they've recovered from it, they know that they're now protected, so they're like, okay, no, I didn't want to get it, but now that like chickenpox as a kid, you don't necessarily want to get it. The parents want you to get it right up until they came out with the vaccine, but like nobody wants. But once they have it, they're never getting it again. So it's like, okay, for standing on the other side of that, I'm really happy that that is already over with in my life.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
but a lot
So
of just
taking what's
interesting
happened
things.
and really being able to kind of see how you could have gone other directions and yet you didn't, right? And every once in a while, like you have to follow the breadcrumbs for a little bit, right? You have to kind of see where this goes, dip your toes in, see what it's about, to know what you don't want. Every once in a while, you know, the experience of what we do want comes from what we don't want, or what we didn't think would, you know, help propel us forward, or things like that. That's kind of what I'm hearing you say there.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, that's a good way of putting it. You know, I mean, people talk about inflection points, if that's what you want to call it. There's also sometimes when you know, you're doing something or you're thinking about doing something and you say, you know what, it just doesn't make sense. There was a point in time in my life when I was doing something, which I won't specify for many reasons. And at some point, very shortly after I started, I was like looking at it, risk, reward, and like other stuff, and I was like, this just doesn't make any sense, right? Like this is not a path that I want to be going down. And so that was one of the instances in which I was like, you know what, this is just something that I have to go ahead and just stop, because it just doesn't make any sense.
There we go. Yeah.
And I mean, there's another example that I can bring up in a little bit more detail, um, which is like a fascinating thing, the way that it happened, because I don't think it happens like this to everybody. But when I was 15 and working at this pizza shop, I wanted to get my driver's license. Maryland makes you get a certain number of hours of driving practice with somebody in the car, right? Like a learner's permit type stuff. So it's very hard to get that many hours sometimes unless you have a reason and a way to drive a lot. So a man at the pizza shop who I got very close with, um, he's like, I don't mind if you drive my car on the way to the meeting, because he was in NA and AA meetings. He's like, I don't mind if you drive my car to the meeting, and I don't mind if you drive my car back from the meeting, but you're going to come to the meeting with me. And I'm like, okay, whatever. You know, I'm 15. I didn't have much else. I didn't have anything else going on. I'm like, whatever. It sounds like something to do at night. So I started driving him to these meetings. And meanwhile, I had no business being in these rooms at the time. Um, you know, thank God I still don't have any sort of like addiction problem. So like, but like I walked into these rooms with nothing, you know, and like I'm like walking in, like the first time he like nudges me to introduce myself, and like in these meetings, if anybody hasn't been, you know, when they'll say, is anybody new? And so like the person stands up or raises their hand and says, you know, my name is Ari, and if it's an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, the typical thing to say is, and I'm an alcoholic. And if it's a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, the typical thing to say is, and I'm an addict. Well, we go to this thing and one time he nudges me to like, you know, introduce myself, and I'm like, okay, hi, my name's Ari, and I just stop. And it's just not the typical way to introduce yourself. So he like looks, he's like, he don't know what he is yet. Which,
like, he doesn't know how right he is.
yeah, so like and but everybody in the room just assumed that like he knows that I'm using and that I belong there, and I'm just not willing to admit that I'm an addict. So they're like, okay, whatever, they just blew it off. But you know, since then, when I go to these things, just to, you know, there's the saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, and there's other versions of that as well. If I walk into one of these things, like I went a number of years ago to somebody who was celebrating the anniversary and they asked me to come. So I walked in, and you know, when they do the thing, either I just don't introduce myself, or if I do introduce myself, I just follow convention, regardless of what the truth is. It just, you know, it makes people feel more comfortable. You know, this is what's going on, whatever. You know, so but it was just like one of the, sorry, I'm jumping all over the place. But the reason that I brought that up is because later on in my life, when I was an older teenager, and I actually was around people who were doing things and making these bad mistakes, and you know, like I see people like, you know, doing heroin or doing like some serious drugs or snorting cocaine or whatever it is, and they're all around me. I had been to these meetings so many times and listened to people being like, and then I started doing heroin and everything went way worse than it ever was before. And here's all the ways that my life fell apart. And then I started doing cocaine and here's all the ways that my life fell apart. Like I had heard so many stories of people whose entire life got destroyed to such a sharp degree from whatever it was, from whatever things that they were doing, that it was such an easy thing to sit there and be like, yeah, that's just not going to happen. Because a lot of people might sit there and try and tell themselves as teenagers, right, we're invincible, we live forever, right, nothing's ever going to happen to me. So a lot of teenagers will tell themselves, yeah, no, I can handle it. But in my particular situation, there wasn't even a question. It wasn't like I had already, it was such an interesting way that for a religious person, that God had made everything happen in a particular order, so that those questions never even came up. It was just like, yeah, it's just not happening. And for a non-religious person, just the sequence of events worked so well to my advantage. Sorry. um, it was just I just felt it was like an interesting thing that had happened, that had kind of, I guess, protected me through those volatile years of my teenage years.
Right. Like it's almost like you got the message beforehand and then you knew better, right? Almost
Exactly.
like, oh, no, that's a terrible idea. I'm just gonna go ahead
Exactly.
and not do that. And I'm guessing all these years later, you're like, thank goodness.
Well,
So,
I have a few kids that I grew up with are no longer with us due to heroin overdoses.
right. Yeah. I mean,
And
and that's kind of that story. That's a common story, unfortunately.
right, so they're dead, and then I know other people whose lives never got off the ground because of usage of things like that. I mean, they
Absolutely.
got into it, and they literally cannot get their life in order because of the everything with that. It's just crazy.
Right. So you have, these really specific events in your life, and you grow up and life happens, and then you just start writing books, or how did we get to where we are now? You're an author. I'd love to hear a little bit
I
about your book
am.
and how you got there. But something propelled you to go, I have something inside of me that needs to get out. The world
Okay,
needs to
so
hear this. People need to hear this.
I've been into writing since I'm a little kid. I mean, I have memories, although I wish I had the documents, but I don't anymore. But I have memories of being like, 5 years old, sitting at the family computer in the living room, because my dad was like very, very tech savvy, and using like Word Perfect back when Word Perfect was nothing but a blue screen and a white like blinking underscore, and typing out stories on there. So my aspirations of being a writer go quite far back. But um, so I've always wanted to be like a novelist and stuff and things like that. So back when my third child was born, right before she was born, a friend of ours sent out a notice saying, "Hey, by the way, she worked at a juvenile detention center, it's like a prison for younger kids," and she's like, I want to teach the kids a little bit about other types of careers other than like police officer, teacher, and drug dealer. Who's willing to come in and talk to these kids?" And based on my past and having spent a little bit of time here and there in those situations, I was like, yeah, I'm not interested, no thanks, and point blank refused. But then I some time went by, and I was like, wait a minute, like I can actually relate to these kids because I've been there. I can actually talk to these kids, like, because I was in their shoes to some degree. And so I said, you know what,
Mhm.
actually, let me take it. Let me come in and talk to them. And she's like, yeah, all filled up. I said, whew, dodge that bullet. But within a day or so, she got back and she said, okay, somebody just canceled, we have a spot for you. So I said, no problem. And I went in, and I connected with these kids on such a level that it was such an amazing thing. And at the same time, I was working with a business coach to figure out what I should do for business. And so I kind of like decided to just see where this speaking career would take me. And I have a natural penchant for it, I guess you could say. I've won a number of awards speaking, and I've given speeches to large crowds, and so it flowed really, really well. Um, and I wanted to put a book together, but I just had so many things going on. I couldn't sit down and write it. And then COVID happened, and all the speaking stuff, it just dried up so quickly. And I said, you know what, this is a really good time. I've got other stuff going on. I'm working on other things, but this is a really good time because a lot of my distractions are just not even distractions anymore because COVID just killed everything. And I dedicated some time every single morning, and over the course of, I think it was 2 or 3 months, I punched out this book, and then I spent a few more months, editing it and going through and processes and putting the whole thing together. And then I published it last August, the end of last August, and I did like a self-publishing thing through Amazon, and I've been entering it into a bunch of awards, and it's gotten finalists in some award ceremonies. It's gotten awards in other award ceremonies, so it's officially "quote unquote" an award-winning book and whatnot. Which I think is pretty cool. It's got over 100 reviews on Amazon with an average of 4.6. So like
Oh, that's
the reception,
exciting.
yeah, the
That's so
reception has been pretty
exciting.
good. For somebody who is at the beginning of their career and is not very well known yet, the reception has been really, I think, fantastic. Every single person, I was in synagogue the other day, and somebody came over to me. He looks at me, he's like, "Ari Gunzburg wrote that book." I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, good job. Thanks. It's
That's awesome.
yeah,
So tell me a little bit about this book. So you wrote it. What's in it?
oh yeah, thank you. So the book is a parable. It's told in story form,
Love it.
and it's a man who goes through a journey, and people have complained that it feels a little contrived. It is a little contrived because the part of the goal of it is that you can read it in only a few hours. Like I'm not trying to have people read the book for 15 hours or anything. But anyways, um, a guy goes on a journey. He's sent on a journey essentially to learn about what I call the 5 keys to greatness. And he goes through and he meets different people throughout his journey who go ahead and tell him about these 5 keys to greatness that somebody can use to align their life to and improve their whole quality of life. I'll give you the very, very basic summary of the 5 keys to greatness. It doesn't take away from the book at all because the book goes into a lot more detail. Um, and the best way to remember it is I use a mnemonic, which is the word great, Great. And then so you have the first one is give, be more giving. And that's not just of money, it's of everything. R is a reason, it's good to have a purpose, a reason for being. E is for engage, which is, you want to be more engaged with your life. You want to be more present in the present moment. A is for amazing, to have more positivity in every moment and about everything. And T is for tenacity. The more persistent that we're able to be, the more that we're able to keep on going after goals or things that we want, or just keep on trying to do things, the better off we are, and the more we grow as a result of it. And I call it a framework as opposed to a system, because a system is like, here's step one, here's step two, here's step three, and that's not the goal of this. The goal of this is a framework. You can look at your life at any particular time that you want, and you could say, are there any of these keys that I'm a little bit weak in? And if you are, you can go ahead and just try and improve a little bit, right? If I'm not giving enough, maybe I can give a little bit more, and that'll improve the quality of my life in a little bit, in a way. If I keep on giving up too easily, maybe I can just increase a little bit of my tenacity, and I can improve my life like that. If I find that I'm being a little bit too negative, maybe I can increase my ability to look at things in more of a positive light, and I can increase my life's happiness that way. And it's just a framework to sit there and use to kind of, I guess, evaluate your life, to audit your own life and say, hey, am I doing everything right? If I'm not doing everything, if I look in these 5 different key areas, where are some places that I can quickly and easily improve and increase my overall happiness, well-being in life?
Ooh, I like. I love that you started with give. How did you put these in order this way? I'm just so curious.
That is a fantastic question. The basic process is like this. A few years ago, long story short, we wanted to give my daughter the opportunity to be in sleepaway camp with her grandmother. And it was a year early, and we had an opportunity to go work at the camp. So we worked at the camp, and I was the driver for the camp, which means that I racked up like 8 or 9,000 miles of driving over the course of one summer.
Wow.
Which means a lot of time spent in the driver's seat. But I use it, efficiently, in the sense that, first of all, I don't mind driving. Second of all, I listen to books. Sometimes I'll just, relax and listen to music, but other times I'll sit there and I'll think and I'll brainstorm. And over the course of the summer, I came up with 5 keys, but I came up with these 5 P words, so it's um, provide, purpose. I'm going to go provide, purpose, presence. And this is why I had to change them, because I can't even remember them. Provide, purpose, presence. A is positivity and persistence. And it, because I had to keep on looking at my notes to be able to remember all 5 of them, because they're just 5 random P words. I was like, you know what? I need to come up with a better system to remember them. So I started writing out like different synonyms, and I started kind of like looking at different words that would make sense, and one of the words that made sense was great. So I sat there and looked at synonyms with the word great to see if they worked. And I found that they really worked, right? Give, reason, engage, amazing, tenacity. I'm like, that works. It's easy to remember, it fits. And so I said, that's it. We're going to stick with that one.
That's pretty cool.
So give actually was not.
I love that you're like, I can't even remember this myself. Okay.
If I think about it long enough, but it can't be something that you have to think about long enough, because as soon as you do that, you failed. Not failed really, but I'm saying it's not what I really I really enjoy reading, like self-help books and books that are supposed to help you learn about yourself and about the world around you and make things good and all these things. what I hate is getting a self-help book that sits there and goes through and it's like so complicated. You're like, this is such good information. I want it and I want to know what's in here, but I feel like I need to get like a notebook and write out a lengthy Megillah just to like even have an idea of how to implement this in my life. So that's why like I love the idea that like it's the book you can read and it's got 5 words and you can basically remember every single one of the 5 words because it goes great and that's all you have to remember. And you can reread the book if you want. You can take notes if you want, but you don't have to.
Right. Well, I just want to point out that that took tenacity for you to go over it again and find something that worked. So I always love somebody that I like to say takes their own medicine, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, I learned about
I
tenacity
better buy it too, right?
I learned tenacity most of all when I was doing a charity ride for kids with cancer, which I ended up doing 6 times, which is a 180-mile bike ride over the course of 2 days.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
And I never trained enough. So I always needed to sit there and like talk myself up those hills because it was torture. Not in a bad, not torture, but it was very, very tough. And it took a lot of willpower to stay in the saddle and stay on the bike. And I'm having to reapply those lessons now because I'm learning for the outdoor stuff that I do. I'm learning how to do whitewater kayaking, which means to start with, that means flat water kayaking, but learning how to flip yourself over to roll over. And I get onto I get it right now. I've only been like twice. I'm going again tomorrow night, but like I get into the kayak and I'm like, holy crap, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I feel like I'm going to flip over and I'm like trying to like, I'm trying to go in a straight line and they're like, and I just start turning in a circle. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this. But of course I don't know how to do it. I just started, but like, it just, when you see the people around you doing it so well, who have been doing it for a long time, it feels, so it's like, I know that I have to just apply this ability of persistence and say, no, I just got to stick with it because with enough practice and enough time, it will come and it will come naturally. I just need to sit there and give it the time, which a lot of times people don't want to continue with something because they're like, I'm not good at it. And you're like, of course you're not good at it. You just started. You have to stick with it. You have to continue. You have to keep on practicing. And that's part of life.
So Ari, just to kind of wrap things up, I really admire what you've said in your journey and kind of what you've decided to do with it, right? So often we have a story in our head or our heart or something that could impact others and it just kind of stays with us or our immediate friend group or the occasional stranger we might share it to. But writing a book is a whole nother level. It's like this needs to get out there. People need to hear this, and knowing that it can change people's lives, in the present and the future, right? And sometimes leave a legacy. So what really sticks with me is to be great, you have to give reason, engage, amazing, and tenacity, right? So it makes great actually an action word. It changes the meaning in a lot of ways of, if you're seeking greatness, be great, right?
Right.
So I just think that's brilliant and I love it. So I'm super excited to have you on and tell your story and what this is all about. So for our listeners, if they want to know more or maybe find a copy of this book, where could they go?
So the 2 quickest things, anything about me is arigunz.com, arigunz.com. That'll take them to a website. It's got tons of information. About the book, you can go to littlebookofgreatness.com, all spelled out. So just littlebookofgreatness.com. And people can actually download the first 2 chapters for free and check it out. If it's something that seems like they're more interested in it, it's available for sale on Amazon as an ebook, a paperback, and a hardcover. I do have plans to do an audiobook. I just haven't gotten it done yet. I don't know exactly. There's no expected date on that one, But yeah, I mean, definitely reach out. And if anybody ever has any questions or just wants to reach out, say, hey, whatever, no problem. There's a contact form on the website as well, the arigunz.com website. Always love to hear from people.
Thank you so much, Ari. Keep doing the awesome work you're doing. I am definitely going to take a look at this book and really do my best to remember this to be great, because that really is I like that you did it because it's very sticky. It's already stuck to me. I'm like, ooh. This has been Business Therapy, Humanity Meets Business with Christine Salvo, licensed marriage and family therapist, advanced certified mediator, and hypnotherapist. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Good morning. This is is Humanity Meets Business, Business Therapy.